Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 80 for January 26, 2018. Hey everyone, Daniel Rubino here, joined again with Zach Bowden for another thrilling, non-stop excitement ride of Windows 10 and Microsoft news. This week we'll be talking about Polaris, Windows Core OS, and what it all means, because it's kind of complicated stuff, and let's be honest, this stuff is not usually things that consumers are concerned with, but for those of you who do like the future of computing, you'll be very interested, I think, in this stuff. Zach will also be sharing with us his Microsoft Band 3 review, which is hilarious, because as you probably know, no, Microsoft did not announce a Band 3, but there was one that was a prototype, and, well, it's probably more than one, but Zach managed to pick it up and reviewed it. So we'll talk about that and a couple other bits here. Yeah, let's dive into it. Zach, how are you doing this fine Friday?
I'm not too bad. I'm pretty tired, actually. I was out today looking at the Surface Book 2 and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Surface Book 2 is a fun device. Our video editor, Mark Wim, now has a 15-inch version. He's actually doing a video review from the perspective of a video editor using the device. So far, he loves it. Spoiler alert! But he's going to be talking about the how it works for rendering and for his job as a professional. Like, does it get the job done? So look for that probably in the next couple weeks. He's starting to work on that now. But let's get to the nitty gritty stuff here. A lot of people are going to be excited about this stuff. So we've been talking a little bit about the future of Microsoft's Windows operating system. I still want to dispel this myth. People are like, oh, they're just going to be IBM and Azure and all that. No, sorry. Just for the record, by the way, Windows and licensing and their more personal computing stuff makes up more money than Azure and cloud does. So the idea that they're just going to kind of let this die like a leaf on a twig is very far from the truth. And they do have plans for Windows 10. In fact, they have plans for Windows for like the next, I would say, 5-10 years. Now, the further you get out, the less concrete and the more ambitious it is. And as these things come online and into focus, it's more realistic. But let's talk a little bit about Windows Core OS, what it means. What is Polaris? What's Andromeda? There's also Oasis. There's also Aruba. These all sound like nice places I would love to go to. Zach, give us a summary. You did an article this week. Gave me a little more detail about it.
Right. So we've talked about Windows Core OS in the past. This is the future modular base of Windows that sort of turns it into a properly universal platform that Microsoft, can build different versions of Windows for different devices and different experiences where it makes sense. So C Shell and Windows Core OS work together and make the future of Windows, basically. And so far, we've only really talked about this effort in regards to Andromeda, Microsoft's upcoming rumored foldable mobile device. So the Andromeda OS stuff is what we consider to be the more mobile side of this thing. But this week, I wrote an article detailing something called Polaris, which is the desktop/laptop composer in regards to Windows Core OS. So as Windows Core OS is a modular base, there will be different experiences for different devices, and the Polaris stuff is what we're talking about in regards to the traditional desktop or laptop form factor. A device with a keyboard and mouse and screen, and maybe a 2-in-1 that flips around as well. So this is essentially Microsoft's desktop OS, except based on Windows Core OS. And what I've been told is that Microsoft is building a new version of Windows based on Windows Core OS that's it's modern. It's a modern version of Windows 10. It's just like Windows 10s, except it strips out a lot of the legacy components, things like apps such as Notepad and Paint, all that old stuff all that stuff that's no longer needed in Windows, and streamlines the OS so that it's lightweight and more performant and doesn't decay over time, which is, again, something that they do advertise with Windows 10s already, but this will be more apparent with Windows Core OS Polaris. So it's essentially just this is the best way to describe it for someone who isn't a developer or technical like this. Think of Windows 10 Mobile. Imagine that, but running on a desktop with an actual desktop UI. That's pretty much what this is. It's a version of Windows 10 that natively does UWP, won't natively do Win32. However, Microsoft is looking at bringing Win32 support to Polaris via some kind of virtualization, perhaps streaming the app. They are looking into other things as well. But Win32 Centennial programs will run on Polaris without having to include any of the legacy components, all of the legacy components required to run Win32 programs. So that's an interesting.
And that's I was gonna say that, and that's the important aspect here is the way you can think of Centennial right now, at least. It's a subset of Win32 APIs. It's also part of the problem because you can't, not all apps can be converted to Centennial at this point because they're missing those APIs, but there's also like something like 50,000 of them. They don't all need to be brought into the system.
Right.
But at the same time, we could get by with a subset of those APIs and those restrictions to Win32, the ones that are core and necessary for the OS as well as applications, without all the old legacy stuff. Mm-hmm. And you brought up Windows 10s, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this. But Windows 10s to me is super fascinating because we've been hammering this for a long time. In fact, it was kind of renamed recently, internally at least, or in the insider build. It's Windows 10 Pro in S mode, and I think that's a mouthful to say, but it's a super accurate description of what that is.
I have a theory behind why they've done this, which I'll explain after you explain this.
Okay, and it's important because it is Windows 10 Pro. You just unlock it You unlock Windows 10s to Pro. You don't upgrade it because when you do unlock it, it doesn't go, okay, let me go download this 5 gigs of Windows files and install those. It goes, all right, let me reboot. And then here's your license. You're now Windows 10 Pro. Well, it can only do that if the system itself was Windows 10 Pro to begin with. And the reason this is important is because Windows 10s, to me, is very interesting. It seems like it is a bandage. It was a crutch for Microsoft to go, here's a restricted version of Windows that schools want, IT workers want, first-line workers want, that it's a little bit, it's easier to manage and it won't bog down over time. And we're just going to restrict it. This is not, however, our long-term solution to this problem. The long-term solution is we want to make a streamlined version of Windows that itself is lighter and more secure and all that stuff. But they couldn't do that overnight. It's hard to strip out the foundations or some of the aspects of the core of the operating system and make it. So I feel like Windows 10s was like, all right, let's do this now for education. Because in the United States, they got hammered by Google. Google now controls over 50% of the education market. And that literally happened like in a couple years. Now, I know people are going to go, but the rest of the world doesn't care about Chromebooks. Fine. But the trend says what happened in the United States, which was huge and very bad for Microsoft, is starting to happen in Europe and the rest of the world. And why would Microsoft go, well, it happened in the United States, one of our largest, most important and financially lucrative markets. But I'm sure if we just do the same thing, Europe will be fine. It'll be different and we'll just totally, because they're 60% in Europe. And that would be... and if you think that is what Microsoft should be doing here, you're so like, this is exactly what Microsoft needs to be doing, is getting ahead of this. It's like, we're still ahead in Europe, but let's not risk this and let's come out with our real solution to combat Chromebooks in that market. And that's what Polaris really is.
Right.
Now,
It's essentially Microsoft's answer to iOS and Chrome OS, which I know many of you will respond to. Microsoft doesn't need to respond to them because they're not even, they're mobile.
They're not real operating systems.
Right, but they are, and people, it doesn't matter if you consider it a real operating system or not. If people are using them, and people are using them, more so than desktops and normal versions of Windows these days, it's a problem, and Microsoft needs to also be combating that kind of operating system as well as still dominating in the, the legacy power user space, which, by the way, Windows 10 Pro, the legacy version of Windows 10, if you want to call it that, will not be going away. Microsoft is not going to be killing off Windows 10 Pro when Polaris...
Nor will your current license and PC running Windows 10 Pro change at all.
No, right. Windows 10 Pro will remain Windows 10 Pro or Windows 10 Enterprise, whatever you want to call it. The existing versions of Windows today will remain as such. Polaris will be a new version that sort of runs alongside it separately, and will start off small, obviously. Microsoft won't be coming out of Polaris and going, right, everything from now on runs Polaris. That would obviously be a bad idea. Polaris will sort of roll out slowly to some devices, just like Windows 10s has. And I know a lot of people are like, well, Windows 10s has failed. I mean, can you really say Windows 10s has failed? Do you have the numbers on that? It's clearly Microsoft believes that Windows 10s is the future of Windows. How Windows 10s works is the future of Windows.
And Windows 10s, it was the way education markets work. Like you can't go, here's our updated Windows 10s for new devices. And then schools go, let's drop all our systems and upgrade to this. when are those coming out? Oh, in 2 months. Okay, yeah, we'll do this in time for September. Like the goal is Microsoft gives some schools some room to do that, but the expectation is not that schools are going to drop all their budgets and change things overnight. These things are like IT institutions where they take a couple of years. So you want to get S out there, but the expectation is it's going to be probably at least 2 years before it starts to actually seep its way into those specific markets. And as that happens, then you come out with this other longer term play, which is Polaris and Windows Core OS, which again, we'll have to kind of go through this. Now, Windows Core OS and Polaris, I think, is really interesting because this is targeted marketing, right? They're going to put it on devices where it makes sense. Schools, first-line workers, information technology, and information workers. Those people who need light computing that's secure and easily managed is going to be the initial market for this. You'll also probably see a couple of consumer devices start popping up on the market, like always connected PCs make total sense for this too. But they're not going to be like, oh, Service Book 3 now running this, but the important thing here is that long-term, Microsoft does see this as replacing and supplanting Windows on the desktop. Now, again, Windows 10 Pro will continue to exist. Those institutions that need it, it'll be there. For gamers, all that, it'll still be there. But for the consumer market, long-term, they do see this as as their play. And I think it absolutely makes sense. And I agree 100% with you where, iOS and Chrome OS and all that stuff is, for normal people, regular people who do light computing, is the way to go and what they want. Microsoft needs a solution to that, and this is how you do that. Right. It's going to keep the best of Windows with making it modern.
Right, and again, Polaris will not be something you can switch to. If you're a Windows 10 Pro user, it's not going to be released to you as an update that you have to install it. It's going to be something that's available on new devices that ship with it, which also means Polaris can't upgrade to Windows 10 Pro. There's the upgrade path, like Windows 10S to Windows 10 Pro, it's gone. And going back to my theory on why Microsoft renamed Windows 10S to Windows 10 Pro in S mode, in doing that rename, Microsoft essentially killed the specific Windows 10S variants. It's sort of. So the Windows 10 SKU sort of no longer exists. It's now just a mode that runs on top of S, which essentially that's what it always was. But now it's just running on top of Pro, which, it makes more sense for Windows 10S because Windows 10S was Windows 10 Pro underneath. So what I think they're doing here is they're turning Windows 10S into Windows 10 Pro in S mode, and then they're going to position Polaris as the new Windows 10S. So Windows 10S will be Polaris. Then if you're someone running Windows 10 Pro, you can sort of get the same behaviors as Windows 10S by turning your version of Pro into 10S mode, which is what they're doing now.
Which would have its own advantages too.
Right, more secure for one.
Yeah, exactly. There will be enterprises who would like that option and be able to have devices more configurable. So it makes sense to sort of kind of keep that idea around. Now, I think the important thing here is Microsoft is basically, just like always connected PCs, these will be yet another option on the market with the idea that eventually these become mainstream. I think the idea that in 5 years that we just have PCs that are always connected to high-speed internet wherever we go, that seems like the thing you'd want and the expectation of modern computing. So always connected PCs taking over that market seems pretty obvious to me. But I don't know. Now, let's talk about, you mentioned the word composer, and this is a really interesting thing. We haven't really talked much about this, but the way to think about Windows Core OS is it's essentially a modular system, and companies and Microsoft can build devices with this lighter version of Windows, but the expression of the operating system, that is the shell components, what you actually see, can now be variable. And this is a difference between Windows 10 Mobile and Windows 10 PC. Those shared components, they shared the base kernel, the one core, they shared UWP, the app layer, but all the stuff in between looked similar. The shells you had a similar start menu, but we know the live tiles actually behaved differently on mobile versus PC. And so that was an illusion. It helped with UWP apps and all that kind of stuff, but it really wasn't a true unified system. They have gotten rid of Windows 10 Mobile now because they folded those components to Windows Core OS. And now the idea is that companies will be able to create devices and then have what I would call the expression of a different shell. Polaris is one expression of that shell. Andromeda is the other expression of that shell. And these are what the composers are. You have this composer layer. So for instance, you already know composers. You're already using them. Your desktop is one composer. And if you take your keyboard off your Surface Pro and it goes to tablet mode, that's another composer. And the idea that your UI adapts to what you're doing as a task. We've talked about in the past before, where you have a PC, you plug in an Xbox controller, all of a sudden it goes into like a gaming mode and shows that UI. That could be another composer. These are an unlimited way of thinking about how Windows can now operate in the future. The core, the base, the actual operating system is all the same underneath, but what's expressed on that device, that UI, is now variable, and you can actually have multiple composers in a single device that can switch between this stuff. If this sounds like Continuum, it is. It's Continuum built into the shell level, and then adding more composers to it. And they could, if a new device comes out and a new technology, and they could be like, well, they could put Windows Core OS on there, put this new composer on the front end of it, and it would still be the same. This is kind of a big deal. Like, this is one of the most important changes to Windows as an operating system, I think, in the last 20 years. And it's taken a long time to get there, but this stuff is not trivial. Like, gutting Windows 10 or the Windows operating system, removing that legacy stuff while still maintaining that system is hard. I mean, you can't just go unroot stuff, you know?
Right, yeah. I mean, when we talk about Microsoft removing legacy components, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, they've got to remove Win32. Windows is Win32. You don't remove Win32. You remove different legacy components. So that may include some old Win32 stuff, like some of the old Win32 apps, like Notepad and Paint and Fax and some of those other old tie-ins. They get removed with Windows Core OS because they're unneeded anymore. They're old code. It's just bogging down the system of stuff it doesn't need anymore.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we should point out we don't have a list of all these components that are actually being removed, which would be very helpful. So we're being purposely vague here because we simply do not know. We just know it's supposed to be a modern, lightweight, secure computing system that's supposed to be the next 5
And we should probably
years.
emphasize the security part of this. Polaris and Windows Core OS based devices will be way more secure than existing Windows today because they don't have a lot of this legacy stuff. They won't be able to run Win32 programs natively. They won't be able to run things like malware because, well, old malware that targets Win32 programs. It's going to be a far more secure version of Windows. It's going to be a faster version of Windows, especially on low-end devices. So if we've all used Windows 10 on an Intel Atom-based device, those sub $300 HP Stream laptops, for example, they're all Intel Atom powered. And they suck. Performance, right. Even on Windows 10S. And that's because Windows 10S is still legacy Windows. It's Windows 10 Pro just running in S mode or in S edition. It's not great. And this Windows Core OS with the Polaris shell will hopefully fix that by being a streamlined, modern, lightweight OS that doesn't need a lot to run. It'll be fast pretty much everywhere because it's such a lightweight operating system.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem Microsoft faces. They've had this legacy operating system, which people still rely on and use every day and want, but the rest of the computing world is also moving this other direction. And the Atom processor is a perfect example. Like, there is a lightweight, low-powered processor. It's supposed to get good battery life. It's supposed to be low cost for these cheaper devices. But Windows 10 and Windows runs like a dog on it. And it's gotten better. It's acceptable, but still not, it's not like running iOS. And that's because you're making this old, huge system run on this little tiny processor. And that's the same reason why Windows 10 Mobile wasn't Windows 10 Desktop on your phone. Because to do so would be insane. It would be run really horrible. So how do you make Windows run on these lighter processors that are becoming more mobile and everything like that? Well, you got to gut a lot of the system and remove what you can and make it a streamlined operating system. And that's what this is all about. This isn't about like, I have an 8-core Intel Core i7 processor with a GTX 1080. I need a lighter version of Windows. No, for that, obviously, you can run a huge system on there. It's not a problem. But that's not where a lot of computing is going these days. It's going towards, go look up on YouTube, type in Microsoft Future Visions, and watch their videos from a few years ago where they see computing going. Look at the devices that they're imagining. If you think that device is running some operating system that's like 5 gigs in size and has these huge updates, that has to reboot and take 10 minutes to install the update, you're running Win32. Like, if you think that's the future in 5-10 years, then you just don't have much of an imagination. And in order for Microsoft to get to that future computing where we have these cool see-through light devices, you have to bring Windows up to that, and that's what this is all about. I think it's super fascinating. I'm not predicting it's going to be a hit and it's going to be all smooth sailing from here. I think computing is very dynamic. There's a lot of changes. It's a lot of things we haven't predicted that have come to be. But at the same time, I don't know what else they're supposed to do here. Like, this is, to me, like, oh yeah, this is what you should be doing.
Right, and it is worth mentioning that Microsoft is aware of the uphill battle they will have to face with doing this Windows Core OS stuff. Like, because let's be honest, they have tried lockdown, lighter weight versions of Windows before. Windows RT, some would argue, was their first attempt at that. Now, Polaris and this Windows Core OS effort isn't the same as Windows RT, because Windows RT was kind of like Windows 10S compared to Windows 10 Pro. Windows RT was just a version of Windows 8, which was still full Windows. It still had the Win32 program support. Even though they didn't run, you could jailbreak your Windows RT device and run Win32 programs. It was still technically a full version of Windows, just locked down. And the same with Windows 10S. It's still a full version of Windows, just locked down, except the Win32 programs can be ran more sort of openly if you get them from the store. Polaris is different in the sense that the native support for Win32 programs goes away. It doesn't have it. It will run Win32 programs via the virtualization.
It's actually worse.
Well, again, and this ties into the other bit, which is at first Polaris will not be targeted at any power users. It'll be targeted at the same people who use Chromebooks or use the iPad, right, for example. Have you seen that ad Apple's running with what's a computer? Which I know has annoyed a lot of people. But this is a thing Microsoft is trying.
There's a reason why they're saying that.
Right.
They're saying that
because if Microsoft isn't in the minds of the next generation of kids that are growing up in schools and in education, then that's game over. You do not recover from that. And people will be asking what's a computer because Windows will not be in the minds of the new generation that's growing up.
And Google with their Chromebooks have a new ad where they go, do you ever wish your PC was more like your phone? So when people tell me we don't want like a computer. We don't want our PCs like our phones. It's like, I hate to tell you. But actually, that's where the industry is moving. Now, just because you do not want it doesn't mean the rest of the world isn't moving there. And that's fine if you don't want it. Microsoft's not going to force you into this stuff, but it's really important to see the trends of computing and how this stuff is evolving. And like I said, I mentioned last week with the yoga book. Look at how thin this device is. Now, it's a really cool device. It can be better, but if you think of this as the future, it would be cooler if it ran like a lighter version of Windows, though, because the expectation here, we should say, for Polaris, and we don't have any benchmarks, of course, on this stuff, but this should be like if you took iOS but made it Windows, like that kind of performance, the instant on stuff. Things aren't running in the background constantly. Like, that you should want that. Maybe not all the time. Maybe when you come home, like I'm on my 27-inch all-in-one right now, I want full Windows. I'm plugged in. I got internet. I don't care. Just give me I can throw all the horsepower at this thing, right?
Right. I mean, and Apple is technically already doing this. If you take a look at their Mac and iPad line, their Macs are becoming more and more focused on professionals. They haven't released a consumer-orientated Mac since the MacBook, which was a few years ago, and that was like a half-hearted attempt at replacing the MacBook Air. They haven't updated the MacBook Air because they don't want consumers going to Mac OS. Their main priority now is to push iOS. Mac OS is slowly becoming the Apple operating system for professionals, for people who do like heavy work like video editing, developing, and all of that stuff. And iOS is becoming the consumer/education orientated operating system where people just use it to do word processing, watching Netflix, procrastinating, and doing pretty much everything else. And we've said this before, most people just use a browser. A lot of people do everything in a browser, on a PC at least. On iPad, use probably more apps and stuff, and but Chrome OS is the perfect example of, I do everything in a browser, because Chrome OS is a browser. It's nothing else.
Or give me a couple of phone apps that can run full screen.
Right. I mean, but that's, again, this is what Apple's doing about it. Apparently, they're getting iOS apps to run on Mac OS at some point.
Right, and I think that is an obvious trend to me. The idea of iOS, the iPad Pro, and how they're positioning that, you could be like, well, they're trying to compete with Surface. Yeah, but it's more than that. They're trying to move their core computing audience to iOS, but you can't do that overnight. Like if they just put iOS on a MacBook right now, people would be like kind of upset. Be like, I can't really do that much on there, but they can slowly bring that functionality over, which is what they're doing, and they're merging those two systems.
Have you seen the latest version of iOS for the iPad? It started bringing like Windows 8 era
apps.
tablet behaviors to to the iPad. It's also brought the Mac dock, so you can now run, your open apps run in the dock, like on an actual Mac. Apple is slowly doing this, but from the other way. And it's silly for people to assume Microsoft should just remain doing the legacy stuff and keep Windows 10 Pro and not even try anything else. If you want Microsoft to remain relevant, they need to try these other things. Otherwise, they're going to just become unrelevant.
And I should also mention with Windows RT, people always bring that up. I would say at least 50, maybe 60%. This is off the top of my head, obviously I don't have numbers, but one of the reasons RT failed was just Windows 8 in general. Windows 8 had a big issue with its UI. Now, a lot of people like the UI, the tablet mode, and the tiles. I myself kind of liked it too, but the switch between that and the desktop was jarring. It was also confusing, and a lot of people hated the whole tile system as a UI, even for desktop. It was, in my opinion, too much too soon for consumers, and that's why they kind of rebelled. So RT had two issues going against it, which is...
I'd argue it had three. The third issue being that it was an operating system targeted only at a new sort of era of devices, which was, the Surface line, which was new at the time. It was like, oh, here's Surface. What the hell is this thing? It's a 2-in-1. Why would I want that? I feel that's another reason why it failed. Windows RT had a lot of problems. It being a lockdown system was just one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was also that issue that it looked like a modern operating system until you started going underneath, and it was like, this is just like Windows.
It's crap. Oh, here's Regedit.
But it's like, can I install Photoshop on it? Well, no, you can't. So it was just like, wait, what? And these are tough issues for the company to navigate. I've always mentioned this, that when you have a huge success with an operating system, the problem becomes lock and base. Like just the fact that Apple right now with iOS has to tread carefully. They can't radically change things. Otherwise, a lot of people are going to become totally upset about stuff. At the same time, they're sort of locked into this idea that they have to keep adding features because that's the expectation. Sometimes it's nice to start with a clean slate and with a new operating system and less expectations. But you also just can't create a new operating system right now and put it on the market, be like, go buy this. Because everybody's going to be, yeah, but it doesn't do half these things, I don't know. This is all interesting stuff. Let's talk about, related to this, you did also an article talking about Andromeda. So Andromeda, I would say, is the mobile expression of Windows Core OS. And we could have devices that have both Andromeda and Polaris.
And I assume Andromeda, the hardware, will, in the sense that if it has a continuum mode, the continuum mode will likely extend into a desktop environment similar to what will run on Polaris-powered devices. The article that Dan references here is essentially more of a everything we know so far about the Andromeda device. And we have talked about Andromeda extensively in the past. This is a sort of quick roundup in what we know already. So Microsoft's Andromeda project is both a hardware and software effort. The software being the Windows Core OS C shell stuff we just talked about, and hardware being what we believe to be a foldable mobile tablet that fits in your pocket. On the software side, Microsoft's building a new version of Windows 10 that's designed to bring the OS to a new category of mobile devices. This version of Windows 10 is codenamed Andromeda OS and is part of Microsoft's Windows Core OS effort internally. On the hardware side, Microsoft appears to be building its own Andromeda-based device too. This is widely expected to be Microsoft's re-entry into the mobile market. However, rumors suggest Microsoft will not be positioning this device as a smartphone. Instead, Microsoft is going to try and carve out a new low-volume market for the enterprise, schools, and prosumers/creators. Microsoft did a similar thing with the Surface Studio and original Surface Pro, where it built new device categories for markets that were, at the time, low volume or non-existent. Now, in regards to the hardware, so far we know that it will be an ARM-based foldable tablet that features two displays joined together by a hinge mechanism in the center of the device. Its primary input focus is touch, but will feature pen support for note-taking and inking experiences, and I'm told the device will resemble that of a pocket journal, with its foldable form factor allowing it to be opened and closed like a real notebook and fit in a pocket. The handset will feature telephony capabilities, meaning you will be able to make calls and texts using the device, and sources say the device will feature a Snapdragon 845 and will likely launch at some point this year. And it should last a full day on single charge. This is a benefit of Windows Core OS, and these Polaris devices will also last a long time on a single charge, because with the streamlined version of Windows means, a lot of the legacy stuff is gone, and it's a lighter operating system, so as such, it lasts longer on a single charge.
Imagine combining that with an ARM processor, so a lightweight version of Windows Desktop on an ARM processor with all day or all week battery life at this point. We are still hearing that these new laptops get like 3 weeks of battery life when you use them 3 to 4 hours a day, which is pretty insane.
Imagine how much better that would be on a streamlined version of
Yeah,
Windows.
imagine clicking the apps and they just sort of open up quickly. I mean, yeah, this stuff is really cool. I don't know. I don't want to get too excited about it. Microsoft is one of those companies.
They can cancel it. That's why.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important to note here. This is not a side project. This is some like heavy architectural changes to the operating system meant for making Windows relevant for next decade.
Another reason why I don't think they'll cancel this is because it benefits them internally too. It streamlines development, so they can build.
Right.
They target one base and it works everywhere. Instead of in the past when they were building Windows, they'd have to build a version of Windows 10 for mobile, a version of Windows 10 for PC, a version of Windows 10 for HoloLens, a version of Windows 10 for Xbox. But with Windows Core OS, it's like let's just build one and then just split it up where we need to. It makes development faster. It streamlines development internally.
It also makes it sense in the sense of sense in a sense of how the industry has changed. For instance, 5-10 years ago, the idea of Windows as an operating system needing any cellular support was really non-existent.
Right.
I know there was some like, oh, you can put a modem in there and that kind of thing, but I'm talking about a little bit deeper into the operating system, hooking in, running mobile processors. It didn't make sense. But now the world we're living in is like, oh, we need stuff kind of connected everywhere. There's even IoT devices and all that. So it made sense for a while to be like, well, we don't need cellular support in Windows, so we keep that development separate. That's what Windows 10 Mobile is, or Windows Mobile is for. But now, if you think about that, in 2018, that doesn't make sense, right? There should be a reason why your operating system can support cellular and LTE and all that kind of stuff. So now it makes sense to combine those systems through Windows Core OS, which is what's happening here. It also makes sense to get rid of Windows 10 Mobile. You could argue, of course, it's another reboot, and we don't need to rehash how Windows 10 Mobile now is kicked out of the Insider program this week. We don't need to rehash how they have screwed up mobile 9 different ways. Although we can, the silver lining here is that it's when you're hit bottom, there's nowhere to go but up, right? It has allowed them to do this real radical shift, basically cancel Windows 10 Mobile, let those devices wither on a vine and just let that go, and then basically create a whole new system. Now, whether that succeeds or not remains to be seen. I think ideally we should go back to 2006, and we would be talking about how awesome Windows Mobile was, and that was their future operating system. And today they would be in the Apple position of having this mobile operating system that they're trying to now bring to the desktop. Instead, that's not what happened. So, I don't know. There should be some interesting changes. But
quickly going back to the Andromeda stuff. On the software side, again, we know it will be a Windows Core OS based device. It will feature Seashell, which is Microsoft's upcoming adaptable UI, which gives it the specific dual screen mobile composer. But in regards to actual use and software and stuff, according to my sources, Microsoft is building a dedicated journal experience that spans across both displays when in use that features OneNote and Windows Ink integration. My sources tell me Microsoft is also looking at implementing the same collaborative tech found in the Microsoft Whiteboard app, allowing multiple people to ink within the same journal together. Other apps may also be able to share snippets and other things directly into the journal for safekeeping or annotating on. And the device will feature multitasking, so you can use 2 apps across the displays, like you would expect to be able to do on a device with 2 screens. And again, the continuum stuff, we have already demoed how Seashell works in regards to a continuum environment. When the Seashell stuff leaked, that was running on top of Windows 10 Mobile, which isn't coming, by the way. We have said this before, but just to clarify, Seashell is not coming to Windows 10 Mobile. But when we did do a video of that leaked build, we showed off the phone UI, and then it did continue into the desktop UI, which had windowed mode and all of that stuff. And this is what Seashell is. On Polaris, this desktop UI will look the same everywhere, regardless of if it's a continuum mode or specifically running natively as that normal mode on the device. It will be the same experience. It's one Windows that adapts everywhere, and that's basically that's the best part about this whole Windows Core OS / Seashell effort. It just becomes the same, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to note that Andromeda is really interesting because they're creating it with the Surface device in mind as the showcase the future. And I think it's important because they're the Surface line has always been about like, this is how we think computers should be. And they really go out of their way to create something that's unique and just well done. Even Surface laptop, clamshell and all that, but you and I both agree it's just an awesome laptop, right? It's sort of the pinnacle of what a laptop design should be. So they're going to create this device, this foldable device, and it's going to showcase all this stuff and be like, this is what we see as the future of mobile computing, where it's heading. And clearly Samsung and other companies see that too, which is why also they have rumors of dual screen devices. This isn't some like Microsoft like smoking drugs. You'd be like, hey man, what if we had two screens? Like this is an industry change, right? I do like to think that's how they operate though. But the thing here is that this is a device category. So I think the expectation is HP, Dell, Lenovo, Acer could all make devices and probably will make devices like this, lower price points, do things that Microsoft didn't do that maybe it should have done. Add new, better hardware, add worse hardware so it's lower cost. Just like what we saw with the 2-in-1 industry, which, you know, go back to when Surface came out and find all the quotes from all Lenovo and all those companies going pissed. You're like, what the hell are these guys doing? They're undermining our business. You know, we may think about pulling out of PCs. And now look at it. It's like, oh, yeah, that actually did help the industry a lot. And now I can be in 2017, 2018 going like, HP is crushing it. They're making amazing laptops. Dell is killing it. Lenovo, all these companies now I can point to and be like, they make some really awesome hardware. And that's because of this Surface thing. And I think that's the expectation here. Yeah, we'll get this one device from Microsoft. It'll be expensive. People will debate its usefulness. But I think there is definitely a play here. It's a PC for your pocket that folds, but also is journaling and all that kind of stuff. It's not a phone, you know, and I think it'll give OEMs that ability to go, hey, we can now create something kind of cool like that too. We have some ideas. We have some proprietary technology. And then you kick off another market. And this backs into, of course, UWP, where people are like, well, UWP's dead. They're not building apps for it. Well, how do you solve that problem? One way you could argue is you create a really cool device that drives development. Actually, it's really the only solution that's ever really worked for driving app development. So if you don't give Microsoft this opportunity to try this strategy of like, we're going to create a new device category and hope this drives, you know, well, then the future, then it is just, we're going to be talking about Win32 apps that came out 5 years ago that get monthly updates, and that's your future. And like, Microsoft is just not ready to go with that, or we're done. Windows is finished. Consumers may be like that, but obviously the company is it. So this is the only step forward they can take to try to reinvigorate and make UWP a thing. But yeah, UWP is their future for app development. It just is. Sorry,
right.
folks.
Yeah, I don't envision a future where Microsoft goes, right, you guys are right, UWP's rubbish, let's go back to Win32.
It's up from 20 years ago. That's heavy. Yeah.
It just doesn't, I don't think that can happen. Even if UWP is a failure, it's just, they can't be like, oh yeah, Win32 is the way forward, because it isn't. Right. So to sort of round up and clarify things, the Andromeda stuff, so the Windows Core OS with the Andromeda Composer, the Andromeda device, will probably be the first version of Windows Core OS to ship publicly. We're expecting the Windows Core OS or the Andromeda device to ship some point this year. That's what sources have suggested. It could be before the summer. It could be in the fall. We don't know yet. But this year is what they're targeting. The Polaris stuff, which is the Windows Core OS stuff for more traditional form factors like desktops, laptops, and 2-in-1s, that is scheduled for 2019. Now, that, of course, can be pushed back and delayed if need be. But that's what they're targeting right now. And there are other composers, which we haven't really talked about yet. There are things like the composer for mixed reality. There's a composer for, Surface Hub, big screened collaborative devices. There will likely be one for Xbox at some point. And these are all, we don't know much about them, which is why we haven't talked about them. They're all plotted for around somewhere in the future. But the main ones, for now at least, in order of importance for Microsoft, is the Andromeda one first, then Polaris second, and then something will come after that. And I'm sure more composers will be added over time. I mean, this is the beauty of Windows Core OS. It's modular. They could be like, wow, here's this new kind of device that people are making. Let's build a UI specific to that. That makes sense there. Windows can now run on there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really impressive. And I just want to address this question because I feel like we answer it 9,000 times and people just still do not get it, which tells me perhaps we're not messaging this enough, which is, so is this foldable device a replacement for our phones or PCs? And it's just like, it's a new category. It's not a replacement for those. It's like saying, I don't know, does your TV replace your gaming PC? No, it's a console. Or do consoles replace a gaming PC? No, they just are a different system for doing things. Did the smartphone replace your laptop? No, it's another screen that you take with you around that does stuff mobily. The two-in-ones, you know. Oh, so is is it supposed to replace your tablet or your laptop? Well, kind of both, or not, right? There are people who carry a laptop still and still have a small tablet with them. I'm a big fan of Kindle e-readers, you know. Has a PC replaced that? No. What does the Kindle e-reader replace? Well, it doesn't replace anything. It's another screen for me to look at to do a specific task that I enjoy doing, which is reading. So it's wrong to think about Andromeda as replacing your device. Like, what's it meant to replace? It's not meant to replace anything. It's meant to allow you to do new things that you couldn't do before. For instance, be out in the world, open it up like a journal, digitally note take things, send messages to people, collaborate with others in real time by writing back and forth, manipulate images, do drawings, do this kind of stuff. It's a digital journal device that's also a PC that can also act as a phone. So it's up to you how you use it. And for some of you, you'll have no use for it. And that's fine too. Just like I don't really use tablets. Like I actually have I have an Android tablet in the other room. I have an iPad mini that I bought. I don't use these devices. Would it be correct for me to go, I don't use the iPad mini, therefore it hasn't replaced anything, therefore it's a complete failure? Obviously, a lot of people will be like, I use an iPad mini every day. It's an awesome device. I take it with me on the train. I watch movies on it. So you have to think of this as how we move into technology is there are just different things that we have in our lives. Some are useful, some aren't. Some you replace other items with, some you don't. It's just like phablets and all that stuff. It didn't replace things. It just added to it. And that's how you got to think of Andromeda.
Someone asked, will the Polaris Composer have a tablet mode? Well, the Windows Core OS with Polaris is targeted for desktop, laptops, and two-in-ones. Two-in-ones being devices that turn into laptops. Yeah. So I would assume, yes, it has a tablet mode, which would make sense. Yeah. I mean, Microsoft isn't going to try and drastically change things you expect. Of course, the not being able to run Win32 programs natively is one thing. That's quite a big change, except it still will technically do Centennial via some kind of virtualization. Well, I'm not sure what they're going to settle on yet in the future, but it will be able to run Win32 programs when you need it. But for the shell and stuff, because with the Windows shell is one of the other major legacy components Microsoft is replacing in Polaris, Windows Core OS. It's getting rid of the Windows shell we know today and replacing it with C shell. And I assume by the time Polaris launches, or at least at some point during Polaris's life cycle, they will bring back and re-add all of the stuff you would expect from the Windows shell, including things like tablet mode and whatever else.
I mean, it's important to note, historically speaking, the first iteration of Continuum was tablet mode. It was called Continuum. So when your PC took off the keyboard and went to tablet mode, then it was called Continuum. Mm-hmm. And then Continuum evolved into, well, now we plug your mobile phone and it turns into a desktop. Oh, we're going to call that Continuum too. And I've been saying forever, Continuum is a concept. It's this idea that your UI adapts to the task in the device that you're using at that moment. All they're doing, as a simplified version of this, is they're putting Continuum with more features, more interfaces you can think of, one for mobile, one for desktop, one for tablet, one eventually for gaming, one maybe for productivity. They're creating a bunch of those and adding them as layers to a stripped down version of Windows so that can adjust dynamically. So you could make a device that's Windows Core OS. It has a desktop component, and then it turns into a phone with a mobile thing. Now you're going to get to some hardware considerations, like does that work? Could you have a laptop that folds into a phone? I could make this thing, right, I guess, into a phone and do this and be like, hello world. That could work, I guess, but obviously now you're getting to some weird hardware restrictions. But yeah, in theory, they can kind of do that stuff. Or they could have it as an expression of like Continuum where you plug in the mobile device and there's the full desktop Polaris on there. So that's how you just have to think of this stuff. It's Yeah.
Oh, real quick, we haven't spoken about this yet. I did mention in the Polaris article that Microsoft is working on a UWP version of the File Explorer, which is kind of already known. It was an open secret.
Yeah,
and I mean, me saying this is not really news, except I've heard a working version of this File Explorer will be ready by the end of this year, which I assume is for Andromeda, not for, because Polaris isn't due until 2019 at least, and if Andromeda is launching in 2018, it will need some kind of modern File Explorer because, it won't run Win32 programs natively. So, yeah, I do not think the File Explorer, the UW File Explorer launching this year will be the final version. I'm pretty sure they've got a lot more work to do, but they will have a working version of it available on Andromeda. It won't. I don't expect it to be available on Windows 10 PC. It won't be replacing, the File Explorer on Windows 10 Pro, for example. But on Andromeda, at least, they will have a UWP File Explorer.
I feel like we're doing questions and answers now, but I think they're kind of relevant too.
Shall we move on real quick to my Band 3 stuff?
Oh yeah, let's do the Band 3 thing. Yes, we'll come back to these.
So. I got a Band 3.
When can I order my Microsoft Band 3?
You can't, sadly. So, I think we all know at this point the sad story of the Microsoft Band line. It was a sort of side project internally that turned into this sort of awesome device. Then they made a version 2 that was even more awesome and fixed the Band 1 in every way. And then they cancelled it. And that was the end of that. But internally, they were working on a third version before they decided to cancel this product line, called the Microsoft Band 3, and I can confirm this to be its name because when I plug the Band 3 into a computer, it says Microsoft Band 3. So this was going to be the official third version, even though it's not as big of a change as it was between the Band 1 and Band 2. So if you were using a Band 1 and you upgraded to the Band 2, everything was different. The design, the screen, its feature set, it's how it felt on your hat, on your wrist. Everything was different. It was an improvement in every way. But the Band 3 was going to be a sort of minor improvement, just like how the Surface Pro this 2017 was a sort of minor improvement over the Surface Pro 4. This is more what the Band 3 was going to be to the Band 2. Now, as you can see, it's on my wrist here if you're watching the video podcast. It looks almost identical. There are a few minor design differences. The first of which being the clasp at the back has a different design. It's, slightly different, and it's also thinner, and as well as the battery at the back is also thinner as well. So the device instantly feels slimmer on the wrist, and as a result, more comfortable. On the front, not much has changed. The action button is no longer coated in black for some reason. And there's also a second, I believe, microphone hole for, I assume, Cortana or something. I'm not sure. Software-wise, it's still running the Band firmware. It's not running Windows 10, which is one of the rumors. The reason it was cancelled is because they couldn't get it running Windows 10. But the software is pretty much identical, except it has a few additional tiles, swimming, sort of like well-being. I can't remember the term now. Let me pull it up. It had like a well-being tile that sort of tracked your breaths per minute and whatever else. And
breaths per minute. Sorry.
Yes. What did you? and it's the device was waterproof, which is why it had the swimming tile, and that was a big thing. This would have been one of the reasons alone why I would have got this one upgraded from the Band 2 to the Band 3 was the waterproofing. So, yes, it had a, waterproofing, so it could track swimming. It had enhanced well-being tracking with the electrocardiogram sensor. That's it. The electrocardiogram, which essentially measures blood pressure, and from that it can get other bits of data, such as breaths per minute, whether you're stressed or not, your temperature, so on and so forth. So
wait, hold on. The electrocardiogram measures electrical measurements.
Well, there you go.
Sure about that?
Someone told me it had an electrocardiogram sensor, which the device itself has this tile where you can go in, you can check your stress, you can check your average heart rate, your temperature, your breaths per minute, which I assume might be more swimming than anything. But yeah, and it also had an RFID tag support, which
that's weird.
Which is weird, and I couldn't get it working on this, so I don't know if they ever finished that. The swimming stuff was nice, not something I would ever have used. Maybe if you're somebody who's into swimming as a sort of exercise or sport, then sure thing. And that could track things like, again, breaths per minute, heart rate, time, the laps you've done, and so on. And the well-being stuff was kind of it. The stress and recovery stuff is interesting because it's like, oh yeah, I'm stressed right now. I should be less stressed.
Yeah, I don't know.
And here's what I say, because this is technically a review. It's more like just here's what this would have been. But at the end of it, I say, would I have bought the Band 3? Yes. Even though I was a Band 2 user, I would have upgraded to the Band 3 mainly for the waterproofing and slimmer design. It's slightly slimmer, but that small amount of slimmerness is significant. And the waterproofing just means I can, if I accidentally get into the shower, which I did quite a fair bit when I first started using the Band 2, I'd jump in the shower, I go, oh, I've still got my band on, quick, take it off. With the Band 3, that's not a problem. Except it was cancelled, so it is a problem and was never released.
I still like the Band 3's UI. I thought was super cool. Obviously, I'm still, Fitbit Ionic. I still like a lot of what Fitbit did. I thought it was a little bit caught on more. But the band to me was different enough to make it stand out in the market. I wish I didn't throw in a towel so early on it, but I kind of get where they saw this as like, okay, what's the goal here? Like, are we going to just sell this and it'll just be a thing, but it'll never have significant market share because Fitbit is just like this massive company. Now Apple's there and Android Wear was... Don't forget, Android Wear became like suddenly huge around the same time that band, I think, got canceled. But now you look at it now, and Android Wear, like companies are cutting back on the Android Wear devices because it's not selling as well. It's not just as awesome as people kind of thought. I've talked about this before. This category is hard. Like I tell people I hate the Apple Watch. I absolutely hate it. I think it's beautiful hardware. Just as someone who exercises and lifts weights, I just found it annoying as all sin compared to my Fitbit. Now, the Fitbit, though, is primarily a fitness device that has some smartwatch capabilities, like in the Ionic.
And that's what the band was, really. It was a fitness device.
And the band was very much a health device, right? But it did some cool things, like it had that UV sensor. Like no one else has that even today. And they had some really cool stuff going on there. I would still like them to... It's a weird thing for me. I feel like they could have carved out a very medical niche thing there with that, had they had the right leaders overseeing that project, or selling it, or people making decisions. It's a shame.
A lot of people were asking me about the durability of the Band 3 because the Band 1 and Band 2 were notorious for falling apart after 6 months of use. Now, I never actually had that issue with my Band 1 or Band 2. My bands never fell apart or ripped or teared. I've still got them. I can show you them if you don't believe me. But a lot of people did have this issue. So with the Band 3, you would assume Microsoft would have rectified this issue. Well, from what I can tell, the materials are the same. It doesn't feel any different. The sort of curves that curve around your wrist, they are a little bit more stiff, which at first I assumed would be, might make it a little more durable. But I have since had somebody come forward who appears to also have a Band 3 prototype and said, oh yeah, theirs fell apart eventually. So maybe they didn't fix the durability issues, in which case that might be another reason why the band was cancelled.
I'm pretty sure it was a huge reason. I mean, the sheer numbers I heard, I told you I had friends that returned 2 with 3 of them. You cannot have that as a sustainable business with that high rate of a failure. Like that is just, and that might have come down to like someone at Microsoft who oversaw it, like look at the numbers and like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, sorry, I can't budget this next time because you lost money big time and you didn't achieve the goals you set out. Like that could have been a legit, and probably was a legit part of that conversation. I'm sure if they didn't have that problem, it might have been okay, we'll give you a pass. You can do Band 3 and continue on. But I'm sure they had internal expectations, goals, and sales and return rates that they were trying to achieve. They had 2 shots at it, and I presume they failed at some of those. Like I don't think, and this is really important, I don't think Band 2 like had high profit margin, low return rates, high satisfaction, and like was showing significant signs of growth. Now you can blame some of that, of course, on their lack of advertising or penetration into markets. And I think that's true. But at the same time, they should have been able to demonstrate some basic level of like, hey, this thing is catching on. We have a high rate of satisfaction. No one's returning them. We're making money on it. Like, and I just announced here's a bunch of new partnerships. Like, that's, when you make a project at Microsoft, that's how it works, kind of, right? Same with those garage projects. And this kind of was a garage project. It was part of their incubator, they call it. It wasn't like the company top down was like, we need to get into health, make a wearable, and Surface team was like, we're on it, and just created this thing. I wish that was the story that happened, but it wasn't. So.
Yeah, someone's asking, how comes your band isn't white? I thought the Band 3's prototypes were white. This was the white ones were, I think, specific to employees and were also earlier in the development phase for the Band 3. This one, I believe, is a near final, or maybe even final sort of kit for the Band 3, which would have had the darker band, which is why this one's also dark. Now, whilst we're on the subject of wearables, this week, and I just want to quickly mention this, this week, images of a so-called Xbox Watch appeared online running some kind of early software. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before, but Microsoft's original sort of plans for their wearable was going to be Xbox branded, and this was later killed and rolled into what eventually became the Microsoft Band. We don't know much about the Xbox Watch, assuming it was going to tie into Xbox Fitness, which was like a service on the Xbox One that tied into the Kinect. I assume the Xbox Watch would have also tied into that, and you could have exercised in front of your Xbox and stuff. But that, again, was cancelled and rolled into what eventually became the Microsoft Band, then the Band 2, then they killed that off. Now, I have...
Lazy gamers killed it. The gaming industry was like, we'll try to make them exercise, and then the audience was like, no.
So I have an Xbox Watch prototype coming in. In fact, so does Dan, and we're gonna they're barely usable. The software running on them is so early. It's alpha stuff. I think that it's not viable wearable for even exercise. But it will be interesting to see how they felt, what they look like, and how that could have turned out. Because I imagine if this was going to tie into Xbox, because you know how on the Fitbits, there's like achievements. You can do 10,000 steps in a day. That's an achievement. Imagine that, but tied into Xbox. You can get real life achievements on Xbox. That would have been amazing. So you can do 10,000 steps in a day. That's 100 gamer score or 10 gamer score, or whatever. That would have been great, real great. But too bad they decided to kill that off and turn it into the Band, which the Band was also pretty good, but it didn't have any Xbox tie-ins, unfortunately.
I mean, someone mentioned that Pane, the head of Surface, should have been in charge of Band or been put in charge. But I think that's part of the problem. It was a side project done by a small group, and then he was put in charge of all hardware. And I would assume subsumed that group and basically saw the numbers and said, like, I mean, again, I think people need to step back for a second. If you're working a company and you're put in charge of a larger portion of the company and you're put in front of you all these projects, and some of them you're just like, this is not a good idea, or that's not how I would do this, or that's not how our strategy should be, or I looked at these numbers and they're terrible. Like, your job as a leader is to make those decisions and to be like, I like the Band, it had some interesting points, but this thing you haven't been able to demonstrate consistent growth, you have high return rate of failure, and you don't have a plan for how you're going to beat Fitbit maybe at this. So I'm cutting it. And that sucks if you're a consumer and you're like, I love my Band, but these are the decisions that when people are put in charge, like, that is their goal. And I say the same thing with Satya Nadella. Like, people are like, oh, he killed mobile. You know who killed mobile? Steve Ballmer killed mobile, folks. I'm telling you. Like, you go back to 2007 when he dismissed the iPhone, and then they rebooted it, and it was Windows Phone 7, and they still didn't put all their resources behind it. You can't start from back there with a poor game and not with all your, the company behind you, and then go blame Nadella in 2015, 2014, when the project is already just a disaster and the whole industry's rocketed off and you're still fumbling around. The guy saw this. I was like, this thing has just been mismanaged from day one. It's a nightmare. There's no way we're going to be able to compete. No, I'm getting rid of this. Sorry. Like, that's what he's been put in charge to do. And I think if you were put in charge of these programs and you're trying to carve your own future in the company, you make those decisions too. If you don't, you're just not really good at being a leader then. I mean, you got to make those tough calls. It's no different when a company buys like a media publishing company and goes, all right, 30% of you are fired because we don't like you or what you've done and we're not doing that anymore. It sucks, but that's how this stuff works.
Hopefully this means Surface Watch will be coming soon.
Yes. I mean, well, in theory, right. I mean, we always talk about this. That team seems to be always prototyping something and kicking ideas around. Their engineers. Everybody at Microsoft has free reign to sort of create these ideas. And I'm pretty sure if someone went to Panos and, hey, I got this idea for something and here's how it could work, like, if it's plausible, they can maybe do it. But I too would. I've mentioned this, I think it was last week, that I would love to see a Cortana wearable that's connected to the cloud. And my Cortana just kicked on. that's wearable and works with my Android phone, my iPhone, my Andromeda device, and I can interact with it and uses the cloud to connect all that stuff. And, is a true sort of AI assistant that you wear and can interact with. Like, I'm still blown away by the Bandit's keyboard. When people tell me, like, when people are yelling at me with the yoga book and like, that keyboard sucks and you can never have that kind of keyboard. I'm like, dude, I was typing on the Microsoft Band, and that blew my mind because it worked.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bang out a paragraph, but for short messages, I think it was awesome. Like, I want to see that technology continue.
And it was surprisingly accurate because the sort of algorithm on the Band keyboard was like, sort of press near the letter. You don't have to be accurate, and we'll try and guess what you were typing. And it did it almost perfectly every time.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
Yeah. And that's one thing that sucks about Fitbit. They don't have, because of their restrictions with the OS, you can't respond to messages, which is,
that's one thing I'm enjoying again on the Band 3 is the being able to reply to notifications. I'm just like, yep, I'll be there. Done.
Yep. Yeah, I would love Surface Team. Just think about it.
I've just had a thought. You just mentioned how Cortana in a band or the wearable would be a smart idea. Imagine, I don't think any wearable's done this yet. Maybe the Apple Watch does, but we rely on virtual assistants by having to sort of interact with them. We have to pull out our phone and say the voice command or whatever, or we tap on a button. If you had a wearable that was just always listening and you didn't have to be paired, maybe paired to your phone, but you didn't
turn
have to,
my lights on. Yeah.
You wouldn't even have to lift your wrist. You just say, "Hey Cortana, turn my lights on." Oh, my Cortana turned on there. But and you wouldn't even have to, you wouldn't have to interact with anything to do it. You just say it, even if there's not a speaker in the room or anything. If it's just listening to your watch.
Turning off.
I mean,
lights.
I had a Schlage lock. I still have it, but it's not installed. Where you put a transponder on your keychain, and as you approached the door, it would go. Boop, boop, it detected you and locked your door for you, and that was amazing when you're carrying groceries. And so. But there was no reason why like the Microsoft Band or a wearable couldn't have that built in. So I think, and this is a hunch, I have no proof of this. And for all I know, the Surface Team is like, we're never doing a wearable. I don't think that's the case. I think the case is this idea of a Cortana wearable that does those things you're talking about would be amazing and awesome. But the AI systems aren't there yet to make that realistic, right? It's still kludgy. There's still delays. But that's not always going to be the case. The idea that, you walk into a room and like, turn the lights on, like it just works, right? I think humans are capable of achieving that in say 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Right? I can't imagine 20 years. I'm still like, we haven't figured out automation yet. So I think as those systems come online and what we call AI today, which is really not AI. I'm sorry, telling Google, play me a song is, come on, people. Like, this is voice recognition with a little thing in the background, right? I'm talking true AI. When those systems do come online, these kind of wearable things, scenarios that become more realistic. And I really hope like the Surface Team and Microsoft is thinking about that kind of scenario. Something where Home Hub, right, with Microsoft exists. And because, unlocking your doors, open your garage door, turning your lights on, messaging people, all that seems to be like, something that would be very cool to have.
It just sucks that all of these ideas is something Microsoft has to tackle as an uphill battle rather than, coming into the market like, we're the best here. Because even if they are the best, too many people are invested in Apple and Google now. It's going to be difficult to get into all of these consumer oriented markets, but at least they appear to be looking into some of this stuff.
Yeah. Oh well, future computing, quantum computing, AI, mixed reality, ambient computing, all this stuff will be interesting next 5 years.
But can I use Cortana in another country, Dan?
Yes. Yeah. Right. Seriously. Oops. Oh, wow. Okay. Hey, either way, I don't care. This stuff is fun. I think if you're not appreciating the technology all around you, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Apple, whatever, then you're just missing the boat here. You got to really just think about what it was like 5 years ago and how much has dramatically changed. And then be like, okay, I always tell people this, what is your smartphone going to look like in 10 years? Like it's so far advanced that like I don't even know if we're going to have actual what we call smartphones. Like this stuff is going to be insane, the rate of acceleration. It's just really cool to think about. And that's why I find fun about this stuff. It's why I'm excited about it. I'm not like, oh, everybody's screwing up and everything sucks. Like sorry, we're living in amazing times, people. It's okay to be excited about it once in a while, you know? All right, I think that about does it. We're just over an hour. Let's take some questions from the audience, only for the live thing. If you're listening to this as a recorded podcast, this is sadly where we have to drop you off at the train station. But you can join us live Fridays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time on mixer.com/Windows Central. Join in the conversation. Ask us direct questions. Otherwise, go check out our YouTube channel. Been putting up a lot of videos there. Got more coming. We have a bunch of stories next week. You can follow me on Twitter at Daniel_Rubino, Rubino. I can almost spell my name. Or follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN. We're expecting a lot more cool stuff from Microsoft this year. Some of it we're going to pre-announce for them. Some of it I'm sure they're going to be very pissed about. I'm pretty sure they're not happy about the stuff we've been talking about this week, but I like to think we're phrasing it properly. They're at least you're getting the story right, what we're trying to do here. But maybe not, we'll see. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll catch you guys next week. Take care, everybody.